Okay, so first of all, thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm Phil Kelly. I lead the business development work at O1 Labs. This is the first Twitter space that we've held, and we're planning on having a series of these. So please let us know any topics that you prefer for future sessions or feedback on the session today. You can either DM us at the O1 Labs Twitter account or just hit me up directly. I'm Phil_Kelly_NYC. So yeah, it'd be great to hear from you. All right, so the topic of the first of these today, we've chosen identity and ZKPs, and we wanted to put ZKPs in the context of some use cases because we think the market's a little bit light on that at the moment. So there's an amazing amount of technical content now. I was just reading, somebody was tweeting about this last week. There's an amazing amount of technical content. So the number of ZK sessions at DevCon in Bogota was just great. And ZKPs is a lot of what Vitalik talks about these days on stage. But it kind of feels like mainstream blockchain from 6 or 7 years ago, where people have realized that there's a new superpower out there. So ZKP is amazing; it'll do fundamentally new things, and they've also realized that it's able to be practically deployed. So it's kind of reached that level of maturity. But now the focus needs to be more on where and how we use it and what the early breakout cases are going to be. So yeah, so we're trying to talk about it a little bit more in the context of use cases. And before we get into that, so I've got DC from WorldCoin on the call, and then also Daniel, who's the CTO of Civic. And I'll hand it over to them shortly or join them in. But just before we get there, I just want to do a little bit more table setting. So yeah, I want to start off with just a definition of what we're referring to by ZKPs, because especially for people who are fairly new to the space, the landscape can get a bit confusing. In particular, because the news has been full of ZK Layer 2 announcements. So ZK-L2s, are amazing, and they use snarks deep down at the protocol level in a way that's really powerful. But it's also quite a narrow use case, and the builders and users of apps on those platforms are right now they're building regular apps. So there's not really any ZK knowledge, ZKPs at the app level. They just get faster, cheaper L2s. So we're talking about something a bit different. We're talking about using ZKPs that are part of a ZK smart contract. And so they allow you to do zero knowledge actually in the dApp. And they do that by allowing you to define and run ZK smart contracts off chain. And because that keeps data local in your browser or on your machine and simply makes statements about it that then get proved on chain, that allows you to achieve things like privacy and attestation. So obviously that's now has a huge affinity with identity, especially in the context of blockchain. So that's where O1 Labs focus is currently. We've been working on an SDK that allows people to build these ZK smart contracts for running off chain and then for verification and storage on the Mina blockchain. We launched the SDK for that in June, so that was a huge step forward. It's called Snarky.js. There's not many SDKs out there for building and running smart contracts. We think ours is really special. And a couple of reasons, well, several reasons why we think it's really a big step forward for the market. First of all, it's built with TypeScript libraries. And one of the reasons we did that was so that developers who are not cryptographers can start to build ZK smart contracts. So we think ZK smart contracts are going to be used, very, very widely. We need for them to be accessible to general developers. So that's one of the reasons why we use TypeScript. There's a lot of people out there who can already use it, and it gives you a big leg up in building a ZK smart contract with Snarky.js. And then the other thing about us using TypeScript libraries is that it allows you to use existing TypeScript tooling from the existing ecosystem, like NPM. So there's a big ease of use point there. A couple of other things about Snarky.js. It uses a version of Plonk that does not require trusted setup. So, nobody needs to do ceremonies with Snarky.js, with circuits they built with Snarky.js. It does have a module for recursion. And so when we talk to people who are already fairly deep in the space, that's often the thing they get really excited about. That's some really powerful secret sauce. It allows you to build unlimited recursion into ZK smart contracts. So you can chain together a whole series of proofs and roll them up and keep them a constant size. And as you probably remember, that's one of the really special things about Mina also. So recursion is super cool. And then last thing to say about Snark.js is that it's got WASM in the back end. So it's optimized to run in a browser. And again, that's really important for identity because it allows you to create proofs about data that stays in your personal environment, the private sessions you've got going, and all you emit from that is proofs about the statement. And then, as I said earlier, when a proof gets generated using Snarky.js, it's then sent to the Mina blockchain for verification and storage. So we're part of the Mina ecosystem. Mina, as you probably know, was launched a year ago. The Snarky.js was launched back in June, and there's work going on now to head towards go live with the smart contract layer on Mina. That's been in QA net for several months. Went to alpha a few weeks ago, so should be headed to testnet fairly soon. So really exciting times. Okay, one last thing before I hand over to DC and Daniel. So ZK and identity, again, for anybody who's not really deep in the space, I mean, they could seem like kind of two contradictory terms. So, but the fact is that in a world where we're working with blockchains and everything's transparent or at least pseudonymous, they're quite complementary. And I always think of three main categories of use cases here, but we'll probably find more or get clearer on it in the conversation today. So one is proving things about yourself or your Web2 life while keeping the specifics of it private. So, for example, I can prove to Adapt that I'm over 18 without telling them who I am or what my exact age is. So I have a trusted source of data of my age in my browser, put it through a ZK smart contract, emit a proof, and the proof says, hey, the person that controlled this, who emitted it and signed it with their wallet is over 18, but that's all you need to know. You can prove things about your state. And by that, I mean, for example, I could prove that I'm engaging in activity that really strongly suggests I'm not a bot. So it's proof of liveness, essentially. But I don't have to show the activity and therefore divulge things that I want to keep private for a whole range of reasons, including security. And then also, I mean, I kind of think about this as a third category. You could argue it's a variant of the first, but proving things about your Web3 life without doxing yourselves. I mean, I don't know about anybody else, but I've probably got somewhere between 7 and 10 wallets, and I actually can't keep track of them. But for example, if I wanted to be a DAO voting delegate, I could prove that I'd voted in multiple DAOs over the last 2 years without showing you which ones. Or I could show you I own this much assets across 5 wallets on 3 chains, but I'm not going to give the exact addresses. So yeah, lots of use for identity and ZK at the same time. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk today. So I'm joined by a couple of friends from the identity space, DC from WorldCoin and Daniel Kelleher, who's head of engineering at Civic. You guys want to introduce yourselves? Daniel, do you want to just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about the project and maybe mention, what your interest is in ZK?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Phil. I hope everyone can hear me okay. Yeah, I'm VP of engineering at Civic. Before that, I was in TradFi and e-governance. And that was, strangely enough, quite a smooth transition then into the Web3 world. And then it got me familiar with finance and familiar with the idea of self-sovereignty of keys, of wallet material. And then in Civic, I was working for a long time as kind of hiding the aspects of Web3, the interesting aspects of Web3, I guess you could put it, from the end user, in that we were providing sort of self-sovereign identity solutions to non-Web3 companies for a long time, effectively, solving non-Web3 companies' problems around regulation and and storing users' information by basically providing them a Web3 abstract to for identity verification or KYC. as that was before Web3 even existed. I mean, I've been at Civic for 4 to 5 years, almost 5 years now, and when I started, the word Web3 barely existed, and blockchain wasn't really considered a social layer at all. It was primarily and exclusively almost a financial layer. Although interestingly enough, all the things that we now see in Web3 had already been predicted by people like Vitalik. But as Web3 grew up, and people started moving more of their lives into the Web3 domain. And I'd argue we're very much still growing up in that regard. Two things became clear. Firstly, the concept of self-sovereign identity had found, and with that, the concept of zero knowledge proof of components of that identity had really found an active user base that needed that were ready for it. And secondly, the paradigms that people were using on Web3 for identity were grossly lacking. And that's still the case today. So people think about identity on Web3, they primarily think of two things, public keys and NFTs. So profile pics are NFTs, and your identity is your wallet. And it doesn't really go much further than that. And so we at Civic are building kind of that identity substrate on across chains, focused on things like decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. And these primitives provide the sort of security and flexibility that will onboard the next billion users into Web3. Allowing users to have safety, security about their personal information, not having to reveal information that they were not explicitly choosing to reveal. So the completely open nature of the blockchain, as it stands in the financial domain, is no longer appropriate in the identity or the social domain. But also the flexibility, for example, for losing keys, switching between wallets, and so on, account recovery, key rotation, and those sorts of things, which are vital in order for everyone's grandmothers to be comfortable living in Web3. And zero knowledge proof is a really vital component of both those two aspects, really. Both in terms of the as you kind of very succinctly put it in your intro, Phil, the various reasons why one might not want to share all one's information at once, and also in linking wallets together for purposes of account recovery or having different wallets for different use cases. So I think that zero knowledge proof has grown up, or rather, zero knowledge proof probably a little bit ahead of us in terms of, as you said, the technology was already grown up before the Web3 user base kind of grew up to meet it. But we might start to see a conflation of these two things, and it's very interesting to be working with O1 Labs and the work you guys are doing on Mina.
Cool. Thanks for the intro, and also thanks for working with us and starting to experience and give us some feedback on Snarker.js. DC, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. So hello everyone, I'm DC Builder, and I'm a research engineer at WorldCoin, which is a privacy-preserving proof of personhood protocol. I work on the crypto team, so like most of my day is spent doing engineering around different cryptography primitives that we use or like implement in different parts of the product. So what WorldCoin is essentially is that we provide an identity primitive where using various tools, we're able to prove uniqueness. The way that we prove uniqueness of individuals is through this thing called an orb. We have this hardware device which has a lot of sensors, including an iris scanner. And this device is able to take a picture of a human face, and using machine learning, it's able to create a unique identifier out of it. This identifier is very lossy in terms of images, so like the end result does not allow you to recover the initial image, and the initial image gets deleted. Out of that identifier, you put that essentially in a smart contract or a Merkle tree, And this Merkle tree is special because it's inside of a contract called Semaphore. And Semaphore is a ZK tool that allows you to prove inclusion, right? So I can do statements such as my identity or my iris code is indeed in this Merkle tree. And the cool part of ZK is that I'm able to hide which ID I'm proving. So this is the whole like privacy preserving part of things. And so when you're a user on using World ID, essentially within an application, let's say that you want to claim a POAP, app, and you want to, as an app developer, you only want people to claim POAPs apps only once. And so the way you do it is that the user would log into the website using their World ID and a wallet, and they will sign using their World ID. That's their unique individual, and then they haven't claimed a POAP more than once. So essentially, this is like the summary of the product. WorldCoin itself started as a UBI experiment. So UBI stands for Universal Basic Income, and we had this idea of like, how do we fairly distribute value to people around the world? And the first issue that you arise or that you come to is that you're not able to prove that someone has not claimed an airdrop more than once. So you arrive at Sybil resistance issues. So that's why we built the proof of personhood. But the proof of personhood is a primitive that's very important in this space, standalone as well.
Very cool. Thanks for that. And then I don't know if people saw, but my colleague Gregor, if you want to unmute and talk, feel free. But Gregor built basically a stubbed out POC that would be able to use an identity from WorldCoin while we were at DevCon, in fact. So actually a great testament to how quickly you can build stuff these days with ZKP, certainly with Snarky.js. I think he knocked something out in one late evening. Yeah, that's pretty cool. There's a GitHub repo that shows that. If anybody wants to look at that, it's in Gregor's Twitter thread, and I think you can also see it in mine as well. All right, so I was going to ask DC, maybe we can throw this one to you. What are the ZK developments that you think will make the biggest change or the biggest changes or steps forward in identity in the next couple of years? I mean, you can talk about the tech specifically or adoption or applied use cases. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So something I'm excited about these days is a little bit more standardization in terms of like which proof systems we're using inside of Zero Knowledge, because like right now there's so many initiatives and both like academic research and implementations of that research happen so fast that tooling is usually lacking. So we are always like tooling is like 1 or 2 cycles like delayed compared to academia. So I'm a little bit excited, like in the next couple of years, once we sort of find what works, what doesn't, we sort of like standardize tooling a little bit more, because like right now the abstractions for dealing with ZK primitives are still fairly low level. So you need to understand a lot of the parts of the technology, and having just like a very generic understanding is not enough. There are a few languages that are like tailored to creating zero knowledge circuits and applications. So Snarky.js, as you mentioned, is one very good one. Then there's things like Circom. There's people from Aztec building Noir. And then there's various other APIs that are more low level and do not have abstractions. So yeah, like that's like one thing that I'm really excited about. In terms of like things that will drive it forward, I feel like we've seen so many use cases nowadays for ZK that like these applications will drive both research and tooling and everything else. So I'm really excited about like things like privacy layers or identity primitives, where you can make attestations across a wide range of aspects of your life, right? So I can like prove things about my financial situation. I can prove things about my age, or like my own, like for example, like information on my IDs or passports in a way that it doesn't reveal anything else. I can prove that I'm more than 18. As Phil mentioned, I can prove that I live in a country. I can prove that, like, any sorts of things, that I have a lease on a car, whatever. Um, and all these, like, different types of primitives, right? I can also prove that I've done some computation. This is very useful for various protocol developments, and just it's really good for interaction with people where you only want to prove like one specific aspect, and then that protocol is able to just like compound all the information it has on you, and then thanks to that it's able to perform some action that is gated to those people that meet those requirements, which is something that possible until now without being very privacy invasive.
Yeah, well, and if I can jump in, I mean, so we've gone a whole like 28 minutes without mentioning FTX. So I'm gonna break the hold here, because like you, I tend to talk about ZKBs and identity in the context of personal privacy and personal attestation. But as I listened to like the many hours of Twitter Spaces over the weekend about FTX, and people were starting to talk about proof of reserves. I think proof of reserves is good. I mean, it's certainly a good step forward. But as people are already starting to point out, just proving your reserves is really only giving people a piece of the financial picture. So really what we would need from a centralized exchange is a proof of the whole balance sheet and some analysis of it as well. So all the liabilities, all their assets, whether it's on chain or traditional contracts off chain, and whether it's on the balance sheet or off balance sheet liabilities. I mean, you kind of need all of that to have a full financial picture. And one of the things I was thinking over the weekend was, look, you could have a company set up, or one of the existing centralized exchanges move to a model where the only way that they can sign a new contract or take on a new asset or liability is with a digital ID. And so you'd basically, obviously that's a technical construct, but it's also a social one as well. You'd have to have that in the articles of association of the company so that anything that wasn't signed by that was not legally binding. And then once you do that, and obviously it would be multi-sig, so you'd have the executives of the company in control of it. But once you did that, you'd have this central point of control. It would basically be an asset and liability register for the entity. And then you could start to pull together, really full financial pictures of these companies. You'd probably then be using ZK for, first of all, attestation of the sources of the data that were inputs to the building of the financial picture. And you'd probably also use them for shielding, individual wallet addresses, for example. Because obviously all businesses, or certainly centralized exchanges, have legitimate needs for some privacy for competitive and commercial reasons and obligations to counterparties and customers. But, I could see this world where a combination of a enterprise or corporate digital identity and ZK for attestation and, kind of privacy in pulling together the data could be a solution for the sort of extended proof of reserves work. I don't know. Does that sound realistic? I mean, it's actually a big ask, of course. So I'm not saying we could do it tomorrow, but I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, my concern around that. I mean, obviously, I work in blockchain space, so I'm all for more openness. My concern around what you're suggesting there is that it sounds like what you're asking for is blockchain, right? It sounds like what you're asking for is smart contracts and DeFi. The problem isn't that the information is not there. The problem is the information is not open, and that's what DeFi was kind of intended to build in the first place. Was a kind of you don't need to trust anyone. There's no trust involved. It's all, the trust is guaranteed by the smart contract layer. So we need to wean ourselves off. We need to wean ourselves off the primacy of these centralized exchanges in order to solve the problem. We don't need to build a halfway house where we require centralized exchanges to behave something like a decentralized exchange. At least in my view. Where I think you're definitely right, though, Phil, is that whatever solution we then end up with would by definition involve or necessarily involve zero knowledge, because that is one reason why organizations would be nervous about moving more of their balance sheet on chain, would be that they are exposing too much of the information around their internals to their competitors. So that's why I think, going back to your initial question about the advances in zero knowledge, the emergence of smart contract aware or smart contract capable zero knowledge blockchains, or by which I mean blockchains that both have the zero knowledge primitives, but also have full Turing complete smart contracts, is very exciting to me, because it would allow for much more powerful financial structures to be put in place, where you have that sense of trustlessness, but you also avoid having to have complete openness around your transactions and your counterparties as you have now.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, and I actually don't disagree about the kind of long-term future in DeFi. And as I went further down the analysis on essentially providing some kind of controlling identity for a corporate, and then reporting on everything that happens through identity, the further I went down that, the more I thought, okay, this is sort of starting to look like DeFi with some controlled and transparent human intervention in it. So yeah, that does kind of lead you to the question of, hey, why not just make this much closer to DeFi or entirely DeFi? I think we're kind of we're going to be in a transition phase, however, for a few years. But
yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. So the other, just to kind of switch gears a little bit, I think, one of the things that I've been tracking over the last month or so has been the kind of entrance to the market, sort of, fairly spectacular entrance, I think, of Reddit. And obviously, Twitter has been skirting around the crypto market for a while. They're now, I think, putting it crypto more front and center. And we've obviously got millions of users already now of NFTs on Reddit. And I'm wondering what this means for identity, because, a lot of the time when I'm thinking about identity, I'm thinking of it, really from a degen perspective. But now all of a sudden we've got tons of people who are, using NFTs. I think NFTs is kind of a natural entry point to identity. But I'm wondering then, number one, can we expect those customers, those kind of mass adoption customers, to start using those capabilities they got from Reddit, and maybe in the future Twitter, to be more fully fledged identities that could do lots of things for them, as opposed to just being the face of their social media activity? And then, what does it do for the companies that are building more from the degen perspective in the space now? Daniel, you want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, sure. So it is interesting, both an opportunity and a threat, right? That the kind of Web2 companies are moving into the Web3 space. And whether it ends up being one or the other kind of depends to some extent on how ready we are. The people working in the identity space. Self-custody and self-sovereignty really need to be the default in Web3 for this to be successful. I think it's largely an opportunistic move or a hedge betting move, bet hedging move, I should say, from the point of view of these Web2 organizations. They have no vested interest in exposing or giving up their valuable sources of data and their sources of income, which is their user base, unless their users demand it of them. And by which I mean, unless the users demand self-custody and self-sovereignty of identity, they won't give that up willingly. They're not entering into Web3, in my view anyway, not doing it because they believe in the principles of Web3 in that regard. And the users won't demand it of them unless it's attractive to them, unless it's the default, and unless it provides at least as much benefit to the more traditional sort of federated identities or siloed identities that they're used to. And this is a kind of we see that also in the NFT space, right, where NFTs initially came along and people were minting them to their wallets, all nice and self-sovereign. But as bigger brands started coming in, and they had portals that provisioned custodial wallets for their users, so users were so to speak receiving NFTs, but really not being in control of the keys behind them, and that's a very challenging topic because key custody is something that most people aren't used to, and most people aren't really equipped or educated enough to be able to possess in a way that would be safe for them. So we have to be ready in time for when these Web2 companies come in. Otherwise, there will be really no benefit to the Web3 space by and large of these companies joining.
Yeah. Do you feel like I mean, I don't know how much you can kind of disclose about your adoption, but I mean, do you see, are you really seeing adoption by the existing Web3 space, or are you starting to see more mass market users of your product? And, how do you get people up the learning curve?
Well, we're aiming for something of a hybrid approach. So a lot of our products relating to well, let me just briefly summarize a couple of the products because it helps to provide the context. So the two products that we kind of aim to the market, one is called Civic Pass, which is very similar to the sort of use cases for ZKP that you were talking about at the start, Phil, relating to things like proof of age and proof of liveness. And we also have a similar product to WorldCoin for proof of uniqueness, and those are all proofs or identity traits that represent themselves, that are tokens on chain, and we store them as tokens on chain in a similar way to NFTs, non-transferable NFTs, in order for them to be read and processed by smart contracts. And we do that, incidentally, largely, as I said, because most smart contracts or most blockchains are not ZK ready, so to speak. So they have to have a token or something registered on chain to look up. And this is our way of avoiding sharing all the users' information on chain in order for them to be able to prove they're over 18 or whatever it might be.
Got it.
But they are related to NFTs, and that way, if you are an NFT holder, then you have that comfort. You kind of know where you stand with these Civic Passes because they behave in like non-transferable NFTs, even though they have kind of more complicated architecture and technology behind them. And the other product which helps to bridge the gap here between kind of mass market adoption and the sort of identity primitives that we're building is Civic Me, which is a portal where when you go to it, at the moment, it only supports non-custodial wallets, and we're talking a little bit about that, whether we should support alternatives as well. But when you connect your wallet, it shows you the NFTs, the POAPs, or whatever it might be that you've accumulated, but also provides a way of linking wallets together, including linking wallets across chain soon, so that you can start to really consider your identity on chain, or your identity in Web3 more accurately, as something a bit at a higher level to your wallet. So there's wallets which are literally tools that you use when you're communicating with smart contracts and interacting on chain and in Web3. But then there's your identity, which is something above that. And that identity can allow for all sorts of features, for example, key recovery, or storing credentials, aspects of your identity encrypted by the key material behind that identity on some off-chain file storage. And it's those sort of use cases that bridge the gap between existing Web3 users, but also the sort of users that we're expecting to be joining the Web3 space as these Web2 companies come in. That I think is vital for that for that to kind of work in a large scale.
Yeah. Cool. DC, I was going to ask you, do you see WorldCoin as complementary to some of these emerging Web2 solutions, or you think they're directly competitive, or anything you can tell us on that?
Yeah, sure. So like you can use World ID to any type of application that requires Sybil resistance. Although also, like, just to introduce to the problematic, like Sybil resistance is this term that is used for attacks where people manufacture identities to sort of game a system that thresholds based on a unique identity, right? So if I have a protocol that requires one person to be unique to do a specific thing. Let's say like if you want to do a voting mechanism and you want to give one vote to each person, then you want a system that doesn't allow people to create many identities, because they would be able to create many votes and then completely destroy the guarantees of the voting system. So this entire like attack vector is called a Sybil attack, and systems that are sort of resistant to this are Sybil resistant. So like if you want to build any type of applications that require Sybil resistance, you could use WorldCoin. However, the issue with these solutions, like uniqueness solutions, is that if you want to deploy them at the scale of Web2 user bases, you'd have to have a massive user base for the Sybil resistance mechanism that you're using, right? So if you want to use WorldCoin, you'd be limited to the 720,000 signups that we have so far, right? Like we're signing up about like 3,000 people per day, but if you want to reach to millions or billions, such like user bases of like Meta or Instagram, if any major application have, then you'd have to go and scan all of those people if you want to provide them a service that like requires Sybil resistance, right?
Yeah.
So like we're still in the infancy. For me, like right now is the way that I see integrating like resistance or Sybil resistance to these projects, like Web2 projects, if they would like to sort of find a middle solution where they can aggregate different data feeds, and through ZK you can do like different attestations, and like together you can weigh different parts of it and then aggregate them and have like a final score. So to give an example, a good example of this is like Gitcoin Passport, right?
Yeah.
Passport, you can just like add different sources of uniqueness, right? Like your GitHub, your Twitter, your Facebook, your WorldCoin, your like whatever source they can add. And then you can make, for example, on top of that, you can make like attestations about your on-chain activity, right? Like you have a wallet that has a nonce greater than 300 on Ethereum mainnet, so you're like a very active user. You can make like different attestations on top of that, and that's a very good measurement of uniqueness already. You don't necessarily need to have like a hard metric that's like based off of biometrics like WorldCoin. So that's sort of how I see it.
Yeah.
You also mentioned like identity silos across these different Web2 platforms. I see that like many people are coming up with very interesting cryptographic primitives that allow you to create data feeds from these different siloed communities. So there's papers such as Deco, which allows you to aggregate different data feeds from the TLS protocol. So you could essentially have like a TLS session on any website and gather any data that's on there and create a trusted oracle, like an oracle that you can verify the data source from. And then you can aggregate through a ZKP information from different website profiles, right? So I can make an attestation that like my karma on Reddit, karma is like this point measurement system where like the more you interact with different posts and the more engagement you get, the more karma you have, right? So you get karma points, then you have like some form of like Facebook reputation, then you have some like Twitter reputation, like likes, followers, whatever. And then if you aggregate all those things together, for example, you can create a zero knowledge proof that you're like a master social media, whatever, and you can create a badge off of that can be like a transferable NFT from your wallets.
Yeah, and that's definitely an interesting use case to us. So just for everybody's information, if you look on the roadmap, we're working on we call that ZK Oracle. So essentially, having an MPC capability in a TLS session to be able to extract trusted data. So an MPC capability, and then a ZK capability for either masking it down to a subset of the data or making a statement about the data without sending it all to the destination. And then as part of that, I mean, as you said, there's kind of multiple underlying cryptographic schemes, and so custom gate capabilities in Snarky.js will allow those to be handled efficiently. So yeah, that's definitely a very cool use case that we're interested in. Yeah, I'm glad you referenced the Gitcoin presentation. That was really awesome. I think that was the one presentation from DevCon that I actually tweeted a link to afterwards, because it was just such a kind of holistic view of the future, including this dynamic system allowing the community to essentially define what doesn't contribute meaningfully towards proof of liveness. So yeah, that's a really good one. I think we're kind of getting towards the end of the time here. We were going to finish it a couple of minutes ago, but Pete, maybe we should just ask if there's any quick questions from the community to consider. And by the way, like I said, we're going to have these regularly, so we can deal with questions in follow up or with messaging. Can't immediately see any hands up.
I just wanted to also point out, like, feel free to DM me or contact me on Twitter if there are any questions. Because sometimes these discussions are ones that are sort of slow burners, and people kind of think about interesting questions or a little while afterwards. So just as while people are thinking now for questions, if you need more time to think than this talk allows, feel free to contact myself afterwards. I'm happy to talk. I really like the idea of Web3 and zero knowledge proof being it's a nascent domain, right? And it's one that's inherently a communal domain. Everyone has an identity and everyone has a stake in this. So you have to kind of have a plurality of voices getting involved in the conversation for whatever we build to be useful to the largest amount of people.
Awesome. Very good. All right. Well, thanks, Daniel. Thanks, DC. Just to wrap up here, I mean, I urge everybody else. I mentioned on the phone on the space earlier that Gregor had knocked out a basic zk smart contract in a kind of meaningful POC context in afternoon and evening. Gregor works really fast, but I think it's truly realistic to build your first basic zk smart contract with Snarky.js in a single digit number of hours. Something basic then might need some more debugging, but you can, with this important space emerging so quickly, it's kind of time to get hands on and build something. So it's written in TypeScript, it's very user friendly. So I'd kind of urge you to do that. We've got tutorials online, both in our Twitter feeds, and Mina Foundation has got some great material on its website. So I'd kind of encourage you to look there. And then the last thing I wanted to mention was that the Mina Foundation has got some cool new material out. There's a Mina developers Twitter account, so feel free to kind of look that up and follow that. And yeah, really appreciate your time today. Love any follow-up questions. Give us feedback and topics for the next session, and we'll look forward to talking to you all soon. Have a great day.
Thank you for having us.
Phil.
Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.